There are two things in this world that can drive a reasonable man to unreasonable lengths: a petty tyrant with a thimbleful of power, and a threat to the one thing he built with his own two hands. For me, it was a perfect storm of both. My name is Alex, and for 30 years, my entire professional life was spent in the quiet, methodical world of municipal zoning and urban planning. I wasn't one of the big-shot developers you see on magazine covers. I was the guy they hired to make sure their grand visions didn't violate a forgotten ordinance from 1923. I knew plat maps, easements, and public rights-of-way the way a priest knows scripture. When I retired, all I wanted was peace. I bought a few acres on the far edge of a newer subdivision called Oakwood Preserve. The property was perfect for one reason. It came with a magnificent, century-old barn. It had a foundation of solid stone and beams of ancient, hand-hewn oak. My dream wasn't to play golf or attend neighborhood potlucks. It was to restore that barn into the ultimate workshop, a sanctuary of sawdust and solitude. Unfortunately, my sanctuary bordered a kingdom, and every kingdom has a king. In this case, it was Mr. Gerald Blevins, president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association. Blevins was a man whose personality was as bland and beige as the vinyl siding on his house, but whose ego was a towering, rococo monstrosity. He ruled the HOA with an iron fist and a clipboard. Then, the letter arrived. Certified mail. A cold, impersonal declaration that my barn, a structure that had stood long before any of us were born, had been declared a non-conforming auxiliary structure by the HOA's Architectural Review Committee, which Blevins chaired. A new bylaw, passed just last month, required its demolition within 90 days to preserve the modern aesthetic of the community. What Mr. Blevins and his board of petty tyrants didn't know was that my entire career was built on understanding the very rulebooks they were now trying to beat me with. They had just declared war on a cartographer, and I was about to draw them a map straight to their own demise. Have you ever had to deal with someone who wields a tiny bit of power like it's a king's scepter? Trust me, this story will be more satisfying than you can imagine. My first move was to try reason. It's always my first move. I believe that most conflicts arise from misunderstanding, and a calm, logical presentation of facts can usually resolve them. So I prepared a file. It contained the original property survey from my purchase, historical county records showing the barn's existence dating back to 1921, and a copy of the Oakwood Preserve Master Plan, which clearly showed my lot and its pre-existing structures were exempt from most aesthetic covenants. I walked into the next HOA meeting feeling like a teacher about to explain a simple math problem to a student. I was polite, concise, and armed with indisputable proof. I laid out my documents on the folding table in the community clubhouse, their beige-walled temple of mediocrity. Gerald Blevins didn't even look at them. He sat at the head of the table, flanked by two board members who nodded at his every breath, and he listened with the patient condescension of a man who already knows he's going to say no. "Mr. Miller," he began, calling me by the wrong name for the third time, "that's all very interesting history. But the board has ratified new, forward-looking standards. Your structure simply does not conform." I pointed to the clause in the master covenants about grandfathered properties. His lawyer, a smarmy man named Peterson who was paid by our dues, chimed in. "Those prior agreements are superseded by amendments passed by a majority of the board for the benefit of the community's collective property value. It was legal-sounding nonsense, and we both knew it." The board voted, a predictable 3-0, to uphold the demolition order. Then, to add insult to injury, Blevins announced they were also levying a $50 a day fine, starting the day my 90-day deadline expired. I left that clubhouse not angry, but with a cold, terrifying clarity. This wasn't about a bylaw. This was about power. Blevins wanted to make an example of the one property he didn't fully control. He escalated things immediately. The next HOA newsletter had a thinly veiled article about dilapidated agricultural structures that could attract pests and lower home values. Neighbors who once gave me a friendly wave now stared at their lawns when I drove by. Blevins was poisoning the well, turning my quiet corner of the world into a hostile frontier. He had mistaken my calm for weakness. He thought he was dealing with a retired old man who would eventually grumble, give up, and pay a crew to tear down his dream. He had no idea he wasn't just pushing me. He was awakening a dormant professional beast. That night, the frustration that had been simmering within me didn't boil over into rage. Instead, it flash froze into something much more dangerous: purpose. The faint smell of coffee and old paper filled my study as I unrolled maps that were older than anyone on that HOA board. My anger became fuel for a meticulous, all-consuming investigation. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a senior planner again, working the most important case of my life. My personal library, filled with decades of zoning manuals, municipal code books, and survey archives, became my war room. I wasn't just looking at the Oakwood Preserve development. I was looking at the entire county. I pulled the master plans from the 1950s, a time when this whole area was just farmland and dirt tracks. I cross-referenced grant deeds, title histories, and county resolutions. For 3 solid days, I did nothing but trace the history of every parcel, every easement, every inch of land within a 5-mile radius of my barn. My wife would bring me sandwiches and coffee, leaving them by the door to my study as if it were a high-security lab. She knew that look in my eyes. It was the look I got when a developer thought they'd found a clever loophole, and I was about to prove them wrong. It was on the 4th night, under the stark glow of my desk lamp, that I found it. It wasn't a bombshell in a bold headline. It was a whisper on a piece of paper, a faint, dotted line on a dusty 1952 survey map. It was a ghost. In the parlance of my trade, it was a paper street, a road that was officially surveyed, named, and dedicated for public use by the county, but was never physically constructed. This one was named Hickory Lane, and as I used my professional drafting tools to overlay the old map onto the current subdivision plat, my heart began to pound. The planned route for the 60-foot wide public right-of-way for Hickory Lane didn't just clip the edge of the Oakwood Preserve. It cut right through it. In fact, its path ran directly under the perfectly manicured, award-winning front lawn of the HOA Clubhouse, and then passed straight through the spot where the clubhouse itself was built. The building, Gerald Blevins' seat of power, his castle keep, was sitting squarely on land that legally belonged to the public. The HOA never owned it. They had built their headquarters on a public street. That was my aha moment. A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. Blevins had picked a fight over a fictional violation. I had just discovered a real one, and his was infinitely bigger. The beauty of the plan that began to form in my mind was its perfect, crystalline irony. It was a weapon forged from the very material Blevins had used against me: bureaucracy. He had weaponized a new, flimsy rule to attack my old, solid barn. I would use an old, ironclad law to attack his new, flimsy clubhouse. The objective was no longer just to save my workshop. The objective was to hoist Blevins by his own petard, to use the letter of the law so precisely that he would be forced to preside over the dismantling of his own little empire. My strategy wouldn't be a frontal assault. It would be a siege, conducted entirely through official channels and paperwork. The first step was verification. I spent 2 days at the county records office, transforming from a researcher into a legal archivist. I tracked down the original County Board of Supervisors resolution from 1952 that officially accepted the dedication of Hickory Lane as a public thoroughfare. Crucially, I also obtained a certified letter from the county clerk stating that this dedication had never been rescinded, abandoned, or vacated. Hickory Lane, though invisible, was as legally real as the interstate highway a few miles away. The second step was to understand the mechanism. How does one bring a ghost street to life? The county code was clear. Any citizen could petition the Board of Supervisors to open and improve a dedicated but unbuilt public right-of-way, provided they could argue it serve a public interest. The law then required the county to clear any and all obstructions from that right-of-way. The HOA's clubhouse wasn't just a building. It was an illegal encroachment on public land. The county would have no choice but to order its removal, at the HOA's expense. But simple removal wasn't poetic enough. I wanted Blevins to feel the full weight of his arrogance. The final, beautiful twist of the knife came from the improvement section of the code. Opening a street didn't have to mean a full-blown road. The county could approve a minimal improvement to satisfy the requirement for public access. The cheapest, most basic form of public access? A parking lot. A public parking lot. While I was plotting this intricate legal demolition, Blevins was doubling down on his own brand of tyranny. He sent me a formal, final notice before legal action, complete with threatening letterhead from his smarmy lawyer. I saw him at the neighborhood mailbox, boasting to another resident that the eyesore barn would soon be gone, making way for a community Zen garden that he, naturally, would design. He was so blinded by his petty victory lap that he couldn't see the sinkhole I was meticulously preparing right under his feet. He was building a Zen garden in his mind, while I was getting ready to pave his paradise and put up a parking lot. The next phase of my operation required absolute precision and a deep understanding of the bureaucratic mindset. This was not a battle to be won with loud arguments or emotional appeals. It was a campaign to be won with rubber stamps and docket numbers. I decided early on to act alone. Bringing in an ally, even a sympathetic neighbor, would introduce variables and potential leaks. This needed to be a surgical strike, executed with the quiet confidence of an expert. My knowledge of the system was my only true accomplice. I traded my comfortable retirement clothes for the official-looking blazer and trousers I used to wear to planning commission meetings. For an entire week, I became a fixture at the county government center. I didn't file everything at once. I visited different departments on different days, building my case piece by piece so as not to raise any single clerk's suspicion. At the Public Works Department, I obtained the official engineering standards for low-traffic public access ways. At the surveyor's office, I had them officially certify my overlay map, the one showing the phantom Hickory Lane running directly through the clubhouse. I spoke their language, using terms like unimproved right-of-way, public easement, and non-conforming encroachment. I wasn't some irate citizen. I was a peer who understood the process. They were helpful, efficient, and utterly oblivious to the payload I was assembling. The final piece of the puzzle was the petition itself. I spent a full day drafting it, citing the specific county codes, the 1952 resolution, and the public interest. I argued that opening Hickory Lane would provide much-needed public parking for a nearby nature trail, a legitimate, if slightly exaggerated, claim. The petition didn't ask for a road. It specifically requested the clearing of the right-of-way and its improvement as a public access parking facility. I made 3 copies, had them notarized, and filed one with the clerk of the Board of Supervisors, one with the Department of Public Works, and kept one for myself. The system was now engaged. The gears of government, slow but unstoppable, began to turn. I had lit a very long fuse, and all I had to do now was go home, work on my barn, and wait for the sound of a distant, bureaucratic explosion. The first tremor of that explosion arrived not at my door, but at the HOA's. Exactly 3 weeks after I filed my petition, the county's procedural gears meshed and spat out a letter. It was sent via registered mail to the official address of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association, 1 Community Drive, the very clubhouse that was the subject of my complaint. I can only imagine the scene. Blevins, probably in the middle of drafting another self-congratulatory newsletter, would have signed for the crisp county envelope. He would have opened it, expecting perhaps a routine tax notice. Instead, he would have found a formal notification of public hearing. The letter would have dryly stated that the County Board of Supervisors was considering a petition to open and improve a public right-of-way known as Hickory Lane. It would have included a map, a copy of my own certified overlay, showing the 60-foot wide path cutting directly through their property. The final paragraph would have been the kill shot. It would have formally notified the HOA that their clubhouse and associated landscaping were identified as unauthorized encroachments within said right-of-way, and that, should the board vote to open the lane, all encroachments would need to be removed at the property owner's sole expense within 120 days. The panic must have been exquisite. Blevins would have immediately called his lawyer, Peterson, who after a day or two of frantic, billable research, would have delivered the grim news. The petition was based on solid legal ground. The paper street was real. The county's right-of-way was senior to their property claim. and they were in serious, serious trouble. The fines they had threatened me with were pocket change compared to the cost of demolishing a multi-million-dollar building. The silence from their end was deafening. No more newsletters about my barn, no more passive-aggressive notes. There was just a heavy, anxious quiet. The hunter had suddenly realized he was the one being stalked. They were cornered, and they knew it. The only question was what their desperate next move would be. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 days before the scheduled public hearing, there was a knock on my door. It wasn't a gentle, neighborly rap. It was a series of sharp, insistent thuds. I opened it to find Gerald Blevins standing on my porch. The smug, condescending mask was gone, replaced by a blotchy, red-faced panic. His meticulously combed hair was slightly askew, and for the first time, I saw the man for what he was, a frightened bully who had lost control of the narrative. "What do you think you're doing, Miller?" he hissed, finally getting my name right in his agitation. He was holding a crumpled copy of the county notification. "This is a dirty, underhanded trick. You're trying to destroy our community." I leaned against the doorframe, my posture relaxed, my pulse steady. I had been waiting for this confrontation, and I was thoroughly prepared. "Gerald," I said, my voice calm and even. "This isn't a trick. It's a matter of public record, something I thought a stickler for rules like you would appreciate. Much like your HOA's bylaws, county ordinances have to be followed." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "The clubhouse appears to be a non-conforming structure built on a public right-of-way. A much more serious violation than a historic barn on private property. Wouldn't you agree?" His face went through a remarkable series of color changes, from crimson to a pasty white. He was a cornered animal, and he switched tactics from aggression to desperate negotiation. "Look," he said, trying to lower his voice into a conspiratorial tone. "What do you want, Alex? Just tell me. You drop this nonsense with the county, and we can forget all about the barn. The fines, the demolition notice, all of it. We'll say it was a misunderstanding. It was the offer I knew he would make, the panicked plea of a man who still believed everything had a price, that any problem could be solved with a backroom deal. But he had made a critical miscalculation. He thought this was still about the barn." I smiled, a thin, cheerless smile. "It's a little late for that, Gerald. The county is involved now. The petition has been filed, and the hearing has been scheduled. It's a public process." I watched the last bit of hope drain from his eyes. "But I'll tell you what," I added, delivering the final, crucial piece of my setup. "I'll be at the public hearing. I'm a reasonable man. Maybe we can all find a solution there." I had baited the hook perfectly. He seized on that sliver of false hope, thinking he could still outmaneuver me in a public forum, that he could sway the supervisors with his talk of community and property values. He nodded, a sharp, jerky motion, and retreated from my porch without another word. The trap was set. All that was left was for him to walk into it. The county board meeting room was exactly as I remembered them, sterile, beige, and smelling faintly of weak coffee and institutional anxiety. The 5 county supervisors sat on a raised dais, looking and slightly bored. In the small public gallery sat Blevins, his lawyer Peterson, and a handful of worried-looking Oakwood Preserve residents. They were clustered together on one side, a small island of suburban panic. I sat alone on the other side, in the front row, with a single, slim file folder on my lap. When our item on the agenda was called, the county council gave a brief, factual summary of the situation. A petition had been filed to open the public right-of-way known as Hickory Lane, and a significant structural encroachment, the Oakwood Preserve Clubhouse, was in the path. The floor was first given to the opposition. Peterson, the lawyer, went first. He delivered a slick, predictable argument about the paper street being an obsolete relic. He argued that the cost to the community of demolishing their beloved clubhouse would be immense, and the public benefit would be nil. Then Blevins stood up. He gave an impassioned, almost tearful speech about the clubhouse being the heart of their community, a place for children's parties and holiday gatherings. He painted me as a vengeful outsider seeking to destroy their way of life over a petty grudge. He was playing for sympathy, and to my surprise, a couple of the supervisors looked mildly swayed. Then it was my turn. I walked calmly to the podium. I adjusted the microphone. I looked at the supervisors, then I let my gaze drift over to Blevins. "Good afternoon, supervisors," I began, my voice steady. "I have listened to the concerns of the HOA, and I understand them. Demolishing a building is a drastic step. It's costly. It's disruptive. It is a terrible burden to place on a community." I paused, letting the weight of those words settle in the room, making it seem like I was agreeing with them. It's a measure that should only be taken as a last resort, when a structure is found to be in clear violation of established codes and ordinances. I turned my head and looked directly at Blevins. But, as we all know, the law is the law. I saw his jaw tighten. He thought I was about to go for the kill. And then I pivoted. However, I continued, my tone shifting to one of helpful compromise. "I believe I have a solution. A compromise that serves the public interest, respects the sanctity of the public right-of-way, and, most importantly, offers a path forward that minimizes the financial burden on the HOA. I reached into my folder and pulled out a single, large architectural drawing, which I placed on an easel next to the podium. The law requires the right-of-way to be cleared and open for public access, but it doesn't specify what kind of access. I propose, as an alternative to a protracted and costly legal battle, that the HOA be permitted to fulfill their obligation by simply converting the land. They can demolish the clubhouse, yes, but instead of leaving it as an empty lot, they can pave the 60-foot right-of-way to create a simple, code-compliant, public access parking lot." The room was silent. I had just offered them a choice between two versions of their own demise. The county council leaned over to the microphone. "Supervisors," he said, "this proposal is a legally sound interpretation of the code. It would satisfy the petitioner's request and resolve the encroachment issue." The supervisors looked at each other. I hadn't just given them a problem. I had given them a neat, tidy, budget-neutral solution. Blevins's face was a masterpiece of impotent rage. He had been so focused on saving his clubhouse that he never imagined I would offer to help him tear it down in the most humiliating way possible. The chairperson of the Board of Supervisors looked from my drawing to Blevins, then back to the county council. "So, to be clear," she said, "this proposal would bring the land into compliance with the county code, fulfill the public access requirement of the right-of-way, and be executed at the expense of the encroaching party." The council nodded. "That is correct, Madam Chair." She then looked at Blevins. "Mr. Blevins, do you have a response to this proposed compromise?" Blevins stood up, sputtering. He looked at his lawyer, who could only give a slight, helpless shrug. He was trapped. To argue against my proposal was to argue for the more extreme option, fighting a losing battle against the county that would end with them being forced to demolish the clubhouse anyway, likely with added legal fees and penalties. To agree to my proposal was to voluntarily accept his own utter humiliation. He was a king being asked to sign the order for his own dethronement. This is an outrage," he finally managed, his voice cracking. But the supervisors weren't listening to his outrage anymore. They saw a clean, elegant solution to a messy problem. They saw a way to uphold the law without costing the county a dime. A motion was made to accept my compromise. It was seconded almost immediately. The vote was a swift and brutal 5-0. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed the shattering of Gerald Blevins's world. The Oakwood Preserve HOA was now legally obligated by a public body to demolish its own headquarters and build a public parking lot in its place. The downfall was as swift as it was complete. The minutes from the county meeting, a public record, were obtained and circulated throughout the neighborhood. The story was just too good, too ironic to be contained. Blevins was not just a bully who had lost a fight. He was an incompetent fool who had, through his own arrogance, managed to lose the community's single greatest asset. An emergency HOA meeting was called, not by the board, but by a petition of furious residents. It was held in a rented high school gymnasium because they no longer had a clubhouse. Blevins was subjected to a public flogging of scorn and derision before being unceremoniously voted out of office in a landslide. His entire board resigned in disgrace right alongside him. The aftermath was a study in contrasts. For the HOA, it was a period of painful rebuilding. The special assessment they had to levy on every homeowner to pay for the demolition and the paving of the Hickory Lane public parking lot was massive. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and it served as a permanent asphalt reminder of the Blevins regime. Gerald and his wife put their house up for sale less than a month later. The shame was too much to bear. They couldn't face the neighbors they had once lorded over, who now looked at them with a mixture of pity and contempt. They moved to another state, disappearing into a quiet, anonymous retirement they had so cruelly tried to deny me. For my part, the victory was quiet and profound. The very first act of the new, humbled HOA board was to formally and permanently rescind the demolition order against my barn. They sent me a letter of apology. I was never bothered again. My barn stands today, fully restored, a testament to endurance. It is my sanctuary, my workshop, my quiet corner of the world. The Hickory Lane public parking lot, as it is now officially known, has become something of a local legend. It's mostly empty, save for the occasional car belonging to a hiker or a teenager looking for a quiet spot. But its existence serves a purpose. It's a monument to the principle that rules are for everyone, and that power, when wielded without wisdom or humility, inevitably consumes itself. I never wanted a fight. I just wanted to be left alone to tinker with old wood and dream of new projects. But when my peace was threatened, I used the tools I had. My knowledge of zoning, once just a profession, became my shield and, ultimately, my sword. The experience taught me that the system of laws and regulations we live under isn't inherently the enemy. The true enemy is the person who twists those rules to serve their own ego and to diminish others. The most effective response isn't to break the rules, but to understand them so completely that you can use them to restore balance. There's a deep and abiding satisfaction in that. It's a justice that isn't loud or vengeful, but is as quiet, solid, and inescapable as a foundation of stone. What's the most satisfying case of a bully getting their comeuppance you've ever witnessed? Share your stories below. Justice often comes in the most unexpected forms.